3 months ago, a case came across my desk that made me reconsider my attitude to ordinary fishing stories. When a colleague from the local editorial office told me about the boots he had found by the river, I thought, well, what's the big deal? Just another accident on the water. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized this story is about how one rash move can change the fate of dozens of people. Viktor Kravchenko, 53 years old, had been working as a turner at a local factory for over 20 years. Colleagues knew him as a calm, reliable man who never raised his voice and always came to the rescue. After his shift, he always stopped by the store to buy bread for his wife Galina, who worked in a kindergarten. On weekends, they tended a small vegetable garden near the house together. Victor's only passion was fishing. Not the excitement of chasing a big catch, but the process. The silence of the morning shore, the slow flow of the river, the opportunity to be alone with his thoughts. He told his wife that fishing made him feel truly alive. Galina often joked about his modest catches, but she understood that it was his way of finding peace in a hectic world. That April evening was no different from many others. Victor gathered his rudimentary gear, an old fishing rod that had served him for 10 years, a tattered backpack with a thermos and sandwiches. Galina, as usual, was worried about night fishing, but her husband assured her that the place was proven. He had been there dozens of times. He promised to return by lunchtime the next day with a good catch. When I first arrived at the place where Victor was fishing, I was struck by its deceptive calmness. A wide shore covered with small pebbles, calm flow of the river, which in this place makes a smooth turn. An ideal place for a measured fishing. Local fishermen told me that the bite is really good here, especially at night. Many stayed here until morning. No one saw anything dangerous in it. But what seemed to be an advantage had a catch. The river in this place has a treacherous character. The bottom drops sharply about 5 meters from the shore, and the current, despite the apparent slowness, is quite strong. Old-timers knew about this peculiarity, but Victor apparently underestimated the danger. At least this is what the investigation suggests. On the morning of April 12th, Galina was worried. Her husband did not answer the phone and should have returned by lunchtime. By evening, she contacted the police. The search began early the next day. I spoke with Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, who led the operation. He told me that the first thing they found on the shore was Victor's neatly placed rubber boots. The boots stood near the place where the fishermen's improvised camp was located. The thermos was half finished, the backpack was neatly closed, the fishing rod was lying on the shore. Everything looked as if the man had just left for a moment and was about to return. No signs of struggle, panic, or hurry. Even the jacket was neatly folded next to the backpack. This strange orderliness of the scene forced the investigators to put forward several versions. The first, and most likely, Victor decided to bathe or wash in the river after a night on the shore. To do this, he took off his boots, possibly other clothes, but he underestimated the strength of the current and the depth. The version looked logical, but did not explain why an experienced fisherman decided to take such a step. The second version the police considered was more sinister. There were no witnesses that morning, but theoretically someone could have forced Victor to undress and enter the water. However, this version was not confirmed. The fishermen did not have valuable things worth stealing, and personal enemies, according to relatives, were also not observed. Victor's body was found 5 days later downstream, almost 10 kilometers from the place where he was fishing. An expert examination showed that death was caused by drowning, and no signs of violence were found. This confirmed the main version of the investigation, an accident on the water. But for family and friends, this explanation seemed insufficient. When I met Galina Kravchenko, 2 months had already passed since the tragedy. She agreed to talk to me because she said she wanted people to know. Her husband was a careful man. Victor would never go in the water just for fun, she said, clutching his photograph in her hands. He rarely bathed even in the summer, always being very careful with the water. These words made me look deeper into the case file. I reviewed witness statements, studied medical documents, talked to Victor's colleagues at work. Gradually, a portrait of a man really cautious, not inclined to rash actions, was forming. What could have made him act differently at that moment? The clue came unexpectedly when I was talking to Anatoly Sidorenko, a fisherman who knew those places better than anyone else. He told me that the river in that place had one insidious feature. Sometimes the current washed up the bank, and large pieces of earth fell into the water. Perhaps, Anatol suggested, Victor was standing too close to the edge and the earth simply went out from under his feet. This theory explained a lot of things. If Victor had suddenly found himself in the water, he might have tried to get out, but the strong current and the cold April water quickly drained him of his strength. He could have taken off his boots while he was already in the water. They would only prevent him from swimming. But it was impossible to prove this version. The shore had changed over time. Victor's funeral gathered everyone who knew him. Colleagues at the plant, neighbors, fishing friends. Everyone came to see off the man who had done no harm to anyone. Galina told me that what struck her most was the number of people for whom her husband meant something. I had no idea that he helped so many people, she said. At the wake, complete strangers came up to me and told me how Victor had once helped them out in a time of need. After the funeral, I couldn't get rid of the feeling of understatement for a long time. Not because I suspected any mystery in the case, but because the death of a good man always seems especially unfair. Victor wasn't looking for adventure, wasn't taking risks for the sake of adrenaline. He just wanted to be alone on the riverbank, to think about life, maybe catch a few fish for dinner. This story made me look at familiar things in a new way. How many times do we do ordinary things without thinking about the possible consequences? Crossing the road without looking, walking on slippery sidewalks, ignoring safety rules? Victor was also doing what he had done many times before, fishing on a familiar shore. But sometimes familiarity is deceiving. Galina continues to live in the same house, tending the vegetable garden they created together. She told me that sometimes it seems to her as if Victor is about to return from fishing, as he has been returning all these years. His favorite mug still stands in the kitchen. The jacket he wore to work hangs in the hallway. Can't throw it away, she explains. His things have to stay in the house. The factory where Victor worked installed a memorial plaque with his name on it. Colleagues raised money for a small scholarship for children from low-income families. Victor always helped those who needed support. This became his real monument, not a marble one, but a living one, helping people as he helped himself. Local fishermen are now more cautious in choosing their night fishing spots. Victor's story became a warning to those who, like him, like to spend time by the water. On the shore where he was found, one of the fishermen set up a small wooden cross. There is no inscription on it, but all the locals know who it is in memory of. I often think about what could have changed the course of events that April night. Maybe if Victor had chosen a different fishing spot, or if he had not stayed the night but returned home in the evening. But such questions have no answer. Life is made up of thousands of small decisions, and we can't predict which one will prove fatal. As I worked on this story, I realized that the tragedy is not just in the death of a good person. The tragedy is that it was so accidental, so avoidable. Victor did not perform heroic deeds or defy fate. He just lived an ordinary life of an ordinary man, worked, loved his wife, fished on weekends. And that was enough to leave a mark in the hearts of many people. Today, when I see fishermen on the riverbank, I always remember Viktor Kravchenko. Not because I'm afraid of a repeat of the tragedy, but because his story reminded me of the fragility of human life and how important it is to appreciate every ordinary day. After all, we don't know which one may be the last. This story also changed my attitude towards my loved ones. Now I try to tell them more often about my feelings, not to postpone important conversations for later. Because Victor also planned a lot of things, and he wanted to repair his dacha, to go to the sea with his wife, to teach his grandson, who was not there yet, to fish. All these plans remained unrealized. Galina recently told me that sometimes she dreams about her husband. He comes home from fishing, satisfied and calm, puts a bucket of fish in the kitchen and says, "Galia, look, what a catch." She wakes up and realizes that it was a dream. But these dreams help her to remember Victor not dead, but alive, as he was all their life together. The story of Viktor Kravchenko is a story about the fact that each of us can at any moment become the hero of someone else's memory. About the fact that the most ordinary people often turn out to be the most important in the lives of those around them. And that death is not only the end of life, but also the beginning of memory. The memory of someone who was there and made the world a little better just by being there. A month ago, I came to the shore where Victor was fishing for the last time. I stood there where his boots were found, listened to the sound of water, and thought that death is not the end of the story, but its continuation in the hearts of those who remained. Viktor Kravchenko died, but his kindness lives on in the people he helped. His love lives in Galina's heart. His memory lives on in this story. Sometimes the most important lessons in life are taught to us by the most ordinary people. Victor taught me that heroism is not necessarily a feat. Sometimes heroism is just being a good person every day, helping those around you, loving your family, and finding joy in simple things. There are thousands of such heroes among us, but we only notice them when they are gone. A month after the funeral, I received a call from Sergei Mikhailovich Tokarev, Victor's brother. His voice trembled with excitement as he told me that he had found something in his late brother's belongings that might shed new light on what had happened. "Come and see it," he said. "I think you should see it." I couldn't have guessed that this find would make me rethink the whole story. Sergei lived in a nearby neighborhood and worked as a bus driver. The brothers didn't see each other often, once a month on big holidays. Their relationship was good, but each lived his own life. After Victor's death, it was Sergei who dealt with the paperwork, helped Galina sort out her husband's things. And then, among the old papers, he found a notebook that turned my understanding of events upside down. The notebook was the most ordinary one, a thin, squared notebook bought at the nearest kiosk. Victor kept notes in it about his fishing trips, when, where, what he caught, what the weather was like. But the last entries were quite different. There he wrote about strange dreams that began to torment him a month before his death. Dreams of water, of drowning, of voices calling him from the other shore. The same dream again, Victor wrote 2 weeks before the tragedy. "I'm standing on the shore and someone is calling me from the water. The voice is familiar, but I cannot understand whose. I want to go in, but scared. I wake up in a cold sweat. Galia asks what happened, but how to explain. She'll think I'm going crazy." These lines made me take a new look at the last days of Victor's life. Galina confirmed that her husband had indeed been sleeping badly lately. He was tossing and turning, crying out in his sleep, waking up in the middle of the night. She wrote it off to fatigue at work. The plant was transitioning to new equipment. Everyone had to retrain, nervous. "He said he was just tired," she told me. I offered to take a vacation to go to the sea, but he waved me off. He said fishing was the best vacation. There was another entry in the notebook, made 3 days before the fateful night. The dream repeats itself every night. Now I see the face of the one calling. It is father. He died 5 years ago, but in the dream he looks young as in my childhood. He's standing knee-deep in the water, waving his hand. He says, "Vitya, come here, I'm waiting for you." I wake up with the urge to go to the river. What is happening to me? This recording opened before me a new possibility of understanding the tragedy. Perhaps Victor was not walking toward the water by chance. Perhaps he was driven by something more than simple carelessness. I decided to find out more about the last days of his life, to talk to those who had seen him before he died. And I discovered details that had previously seemed insignificant. Maria Petrovna Volkova, a neighbor of Kravchenko, told me that a week before the tragedy met Victor near the house early in the morning. He was standing in the street wearing only house slippers and pajamas, looking toward the river. I called out to him, asked him what was wrong, the woman recalled. He shuddered as if awake, looked at me surprised. He said he had gone out for some air, but it was strange. It was cold outside, and he wasn't even cold. Victor's colleague at work, Nikolai Petrovich Semyonov, also noticed changes in his friend's behavior. For the last week, he was some kind of detached, told me Turner. At lunch, he sat silently looking out the window, and our window faces the river. I joked, "Vitek, is the fish calling?" And he seriously replied, "Yes, it does." I didn't pay much attention at the time. I thought I was just tired. These testimonies began to form a picture. Victor was in some kind of special state in the last days of his life. Psychologists call it pre-death visions, a phenomenon where people before they die begin to see or hear deceased relatives who seem to call them to them. But did this mean that Victor was consciously moving toward death? I decided to consult with Dr. Elena Viktorovna Sokolova, a psychiatrist who studies such states. She explained to me that pre-death visions are indeed a real phenomenon described in the medical literature. However, she emphasized, it does not mean that the person will necessarily die. Sometimes such visions can be a sign of severe stress, depression, or even physical ailment. Dr. Sokolova suggested that Victor may have been in a state where the line between dream and reality blurs. If he was really dreaming about water every night, it could have affected his behavior in reality, she explained. In a half-dream state or under the influence of intrusive images, a person can do things they would never do in a normal state. That theory explained a lot. Perhaps Victor had not planned to enter the water that night. Perhaps he was just sitting on the shore fishing and then dozed off. And in his dream, he saw his father calling him. In his half-dream, he could get up and go to the water without realizing the danger. When the cold water brought him to his senses, it was too late. The current had carried him away from the shore. But there was another possibility which was hard for me to think about. What if Victor had deliberately entered the water? What if his father's visions weren't hallucinations, but his way of coping with some internal problem that no one knew about? I decided to dig deeper into his last months of life. A conversation with Victor's general practitioner yielded some unexpected information. It turned out that 2 months before his death, Victor came to the doctor with complaints of headaches and insomnia. The doctor referred him for examination, but the results of the tests were normal. I suggested that he go to a neurologist, the doctor told me. But he refused, saying that it would go away on its own. Many of our patients do this. They are afraid of doctors. This information made me wonder, didn't Victor have some disease that could affect his behavior? A brain tumor, for example, can cause hallucinations, but the autopsy showed nothing of the sort. Although, as the pathologist explained to me, if the tumor was very small, it might not have been noticed during a routine examination. Galina confided in me that Victor had been talking about death a lot over the last few months. Not in a depressive way, but rather philosophically. He used to say that he wasn't afraid to die, she told me, that death was just a transition to another state. I didn't pay much attention at the time. I thought it was from fatigue. Now I realize he may have been preparing. But was he preparing for suicide? That question tormented me the most. For if it was suicide, the whole story took on a different meaning. Victor was no longer the victim of an accident, but a man who had consciously chosen death. And then his family would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of their lives. I decided to once again scrutinize the scene of the accident. Together with the rescuer, Andrei Viktorovich Krylov, we walked along the shore, studied the current, depth, features of the bottom. Andrei, who participated in the search for Victor's body, shared his observations. "The place is really dangerous," he said. "But for an experienced swimmer, it is not fatal. If he hadn't panicked, he could have gotten out." "And if the man didn't resist?" I asked. Andrei thought for a moment. "Then yes, there was little chance. The current is strong, the water is cold. If you don't fight for life, then—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. If Victor really wanted to die, the river would be the perfect way. But the more I studied Victor's character, the less I believed in the suicide version. Everyone who knew him said one thing: he was a responsible, loving man. Even if he had problems, he would never leave Galina alone. He cared about her too much to hurt her like that. Then I went back to the altered consciousness version. Perhaps Victor really was between dream and reality when he went to the water. Perhaps he thought he was going to his father who was calling him. In such a state, a person can perform actions that seem logical in a dream, but disastrous in reality. I found support for this theory in a conversation with Dr. Mikhail Andreevich Ivanov, a somnologist, a specialist in sleep disorders. He explained to me that people who suffer from chronic insomnia and nightmares can enter a state similar to sleepwalking. A person may appear awake, even answer questions, but actually be in an altered state of consciousness, right? The doctor told me. In such a state, a person's actions are determined not by logic, but by the content of dreams, Ivanov continued. If Victor dreamed that his father was calling him from the other side of the river, he could go there without realizing the real danger. For him, it was not suicide, but a meeting with a loved one. This version gave an explanation for all the strangeness of Victor's last days, and his detachment, and his night walks, and why he so carefully removed his boots before entering the water. Perhaps in the dream it seemed natural to remove his shoes before entering the water to his father. But even that version left questions. Why exactly then? Why did the visions begin a month before his death? What could have been the trigger for such changes in the psyche of a seemingly healthy man? I found the answer in a conversation with Galina, when she finally decided to tell me what she had been hiding all this time. A month before his death, Victor received a letter from his army friend from another city. He said that he had found Victor's father's grave in an old cemetery that was about to be closed. The grave was in bad shape, the monument was shriveled, the fence was rusted through. A friend asked if Victor wanted to come over to clean it up. Vitya was very worried about this letter, Galina told me. Said that he should have visited his father's grave earlier, that he was a bad son. He planned to go on vacation but kept putting it off. And then he found out that the grave was in such a state, and he was completely upset. I blamed myself for forgetting about my father. This story explained a lot. Guilt over his dead father could have been the trigger that set off a series of nightmares. Psychology knows that unresolved conflicts with deceased loved ones often manifest themselves in the form of intrusive dreams. Victor may have subconsciously sought a meeting with his father to ask for forgiveness. I traveled to that city and found Victor's friend Alexei Nikolaevich Morozov. He confirmed that he had indeed written to Victor about the grave. Knew he was worried about his father, Alexei told me. They quarreled before the death of the old man, and Vitka then agonized that he did not have time to reconcile. I thought the letter would help him do something for his father's memory. It turned out that Victor and his father really hadn't spoken for the last months before the old man's death. They had quarreled over nothing. His father wanted his son to visit him more often, and Victor was busy with work, repairing the apartment. An ordinary worldly situation that could have been easily resolved, but the father died suddenly of a heart attack, and reconciliation did not happen. Vitya blamed himself for his father's death, Morozov said. Said that if he visited more often, would have noticed that the health problems would have persuaded to be treated. Although we all understood the heart attack was instantaneous, no one could have prevented anything. Now the picture is clearer. Victor had carried a lifelong sense of guilt toward his father. The friend's letter about the abandoned grave had intensified this feeling to the extreme. In such a state, the psyche could give failure, began obsessive dreams about meeting with his father. And on that fateful night, the subconscious desire for this meeting overpowered the instinct of self-preservation. But did that mean Victor had killed himself? I was increasingly inclined to think not. It was not a suicide attempt, but a tragic accident due to a temporary blackout. Victor did not want to die. He wanted to meet his father, to ask for forgiveness, to drown out the guilt that tormented him.